Before you begin modeling cable trays or conduit, you should check their settings. You can access the cable tray settings and conduit settings in the Electrical Settings dialog. You can access the electrical settings by clicking the dialog launcher on the electrical panel. You can also access the electrical settings from the Manage ribbon in the Settings panel by expanding the MEP Settings button and selecting Electrical Settings. In this dialog, the various settings appear in the pane on the left in a tree structure. When you select a setting on the left, the available options populate in the pane on the right. The first thing to check is the Angles settings, so I'll select Angles. The options here allow you to specify the fitting angle that Revit will use when adding or modifying cable trays and conduits. Realize that this is not the angles at which cable trays or conduit can be created. Instead, it is the angles between connected cable trays or conduits. In other words, the angles of the fittings. You can choose Use Any Angle, Set an Angle Increment, or use specific angles. With Use Any Angle selected, Revit will use any angle supported by the fittings used for the cable tray or conduit type. With Set an Angle Increment selected, you can specify an angle. And with Use Specific Angles selected, you can turn on or off the listed angles, but you cannot modify the angles. Next, I'll select Cable Tray Settings. Here, you can choose whether or not to use the annotation scale for single-line fittings and then specify the cable tray fitting annotation size. The cable tray fitting annotation size controls the plotted size of fittings and accessories drawn in single-line views. It is also maintained regardless of the drawing scale. You can also enter a symbol to use for the cable tray size separator, cable tray size suffix, and cable tray connector separator. When you select Rise Drop under Cable Tray Settings, you can control the cable tray rise drop annotation size. Next, for single line symbology, you can control the rise symbol and the drop symbol. When you click in one of the value fields, a More button becomes available. Click the More button to open the Select Symbol dialog. Here, you can choose one of the available symbols. I'll click Cancel to close the dialog. For two-line symbology, you can control the rise symbol and drop symbol as well. When you select Size under Cable Tray Settings, you can see the cable tray sizes and select whether or not they will be available for use in the size list when creating cable trays. Realize that you can add, modify, or delete sizes as needed. The same options are available for conduit settings as are available for cable tray settings. The sizing is different though, so let's take a look at the size settings under conduit settings. Here, you can see a much more detailed table showing the trade size, ID or inside diameter, OD or outside diameter, and minimum bend radius. Once again, you can select whether or not they will be available for use in the size lists when creating conduit. Additionally, you can add, modify, or delete sizes as needed. However, realize that you can select a different standard from the drop-down. You can also add and delete standards as needed.